Let's go on in. Let's give it a couple of seconds. All right. Truman of Cosmic Peace, Particles, and Noon. War Times. We are back with number 31. And Anu finna clarify and clear up some more of the Hammurabi. So those who see the thumbnail, you'll see the whole Code of Hammurabi stele sitting up there. And we about to get busy. So I'm your host, Todd Nupu, and today I'm wearing the old Marsha, aka Mars, the representative of Aries. So I'm wearing her name today in honor of her, and that's my introduction.
True peace. I am Nebu Reunu Nupu, and just like you said, this is the 31st video, and we about to go into some real deep information about Hammurabi, and I'm just sitting on the side, just adding what need to be added, and just taking in the information, and hope all the listeners will do the same. True peace.
All right, all right. True peace, all kins and friends, and everyone in the Suniverses alike. I am Anoop Bunu Nupu. I am one of the Noonie Boos and definitely one of the representatives of the African race, also known as the Ethiopian race. And I'm here to help break the spell and help us get to a better place as far as the SMAT circle is concerned, and pulling the circle upward towards 9 North. All right. So let's get the party started. Let's get it on and popping. Share the screen. There we go. I'll go to the books. All right, so this is the question we'll be tackling today. Shouldn't be long. Maybe like 15, 20 minutes. But nonetheless, it needs to be answered, okay? So was Thothmose the first of Egypt Moses the lawgiver? Answer: no. The lawgiver was Hammurabi, king of Babylonia, who conquered all of Western Asia around 2100 BC, and even went to Europe on his strength and influence. Hammurabi is called Melchizedek in the Bible. Genesis 14, chapter 18 and 19 verses. St. John's 8th chapter, 56 verse. Hebrews 6th chapter, 20th verse. And Hebrews 7 chapter. As stated earlier in this booklet, Abraham was the Phoenician people, and the Jews adopted that name. The laws of Hammurabi, sometimes called the Code of Hammurabi, were not originally his work, but he developed and established the laws and codes that were originally made by the original Sumerians of Mesopotamia and Babylonia, and passed on the peoples of Euphrates and the Tigris Rivers. The original Sumerians who originally created the laws were the African Pygmies. Hammurabi was Bedouin, and the Bedouin were a branch of the Phoenician people. Hammurabi, Melchizedek, was an incarnation of the Sun God Marduk, sometimes called Anu and Elyon. Hence, the laws of the Old Testament of the Bible came from the books of Hammurabi, and the story of the divine exodus of the Jews came from the conquering power of Thothmoses the First. Hammurabi opened the way for more Caucasian immigration from Europe to Asia, and even set the stage that led the Jews' invasion of Egypt. All of this means that the story of the Bible is based upon Egyptian and Babylonian histories, cultures, and mythologies. The the books of the Old Testament of the Bible were compiled by the Greeks, and the books of the New Testament were compiled by the Romans. All right. So some of this information we covered already, right? Like Hammurabi being Melchizedek. Remember, I broke that down in the same passage with Abraham as well being a Phoenician. Um, but we didn't discuss the laws of Hammurabi. All right, so that's what we're gonna discuss, and we're gonna discuss a little bit about the African pygmies as well. Okay, so let's get this going real quick. We're gonna go to our faithful, bald-headed, no strand hair having Noonie Boo. All right, the digital Noonie Boo.
Yeah, blow it up a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I figured y'all won't see it.
Hold on.
All right.
Wait, it's too big. It's too big.
Oh, wait.
That's
good.
Right. Yeah.
All right. There we go. So the law code of Hammurabi, according to AFRICAN, was not created by Hammurabi, but he developed and established them. Can we trace the source back to the ancient Sumerians and what the ancient Sumerians were called? Because Hammurabi is Bedouin. That's a deep question. Let's break it down step by step. Hammurabi and the Law Code. Mainstream view. Hammurabi from 1792 to 1750 BCE, king of Babylonia, is credited with the famous Code of Hammurabi. However, scholars widely agree that he didn't invent the law codes from scratch. He compiled, refined, and standardized earlier Mesopotamian legal traditions. After Unu's perspective, what you mentioned aligns. Hammurabi didn't create but rather developed and established the laws that already had precedent in earlier civilizations, particularly the Sumerians. The source: Sumerian law codes. Before Hammurabi, there were at least 3 documented Mesopotamian law codes. The Code of Uruk-Kagina, Lagash, around 2350 BCE, often called the first known legal reforms. It emphasized protecting the poor from exploitation, regulating priests and officials, and limiting the power of elites. Code of Ur-Nammu in Ur, roughly 2100 BCE, the oldest surviving law code written in cuneiform. It sets fines and compensations rather than the eye for an eye punishments Hammurabi used. The Lipit Ishtar Code, Isen, 1930 BCE, another Sumerian code bridging Ur-Nammu and Hammurabi. So Hammurabi was inheriting and systematizing an already centuries old Sumerian legal tradition. Who were the Sumerians? The Sumerians were the earliest known urban civilization in southern Mesopotamia, modern day Iraq, flourishing from around 4000 to 2000 BCE. They called themselves the Ug Sagiga, literally the black-headed people. Their land was known as the Ki Ngir, usually translated as the land of the noble lords of the land of the civiled ones. Later, Akkadian and Babylonian peoples adopted much of their culture, language, and laws. Hammurabi's identity. You mentioned Hammurabi as Bedouin. In historical terms, Hammurabi was an Amorite, a Semitic-speaking people who migrated into the Mesopotamia from the western deserts, possibly the Levant and Arabian areas. The Amorites were often semi-nomadic herders, similar in way of life to what later gets called Bedouin. By Hammurabi's time, the Amorites had settled and established dynasties, like the first dynasty of Babylon. So yes, Hammurabi was not Sumerian by ancestry, but Amorite slash Bedouin. Yet he adopted, preserved, and expanded the Sumerian traditions he inherited. Conclusion: the Code of Hammurabi is not original to him. Its roots go back to Sumerian law codes like those Urukagina and Ur-Nammu. The Sumerians, who called themselves the black-headed people, were the true originators of Mesopotamian law. Hammurabi, as an Amorite, Bedouin related, gathered these precedents and unified them into one of history's most enduring legal documents. All right, so I asked, who are the Bedouin? Great question. Let's unpack the Bedouin, who the Bedouin are historically and culturally. Meaning of the word: the word Bedouin comes from the Arabic Badawi, meaning desert dweller. It refers to nomadic or semi-nomadic tribes who traditionally lived in the deserts of Arabia, the Levant, and North Africa. Lifestyle and identity: nomadism. Traditionally herders of camels, sheep, and goats, moving seasonally to find grazing land and water. Social structure: organized into tribes, the Qibla, and clans, with strong kinship and honor codes. Culture: known for oral poetry, hospitality, desert survival skills, and distinct dress, robes, and headscarves. Religion: most became Muslim after the rise of Islam in the 7th century, but their identity as Bedouin is older than Islam. Okay, so this would be like an Islamic people before Islam existed. So Hammurabi would be considered to be a Muslim, or or one of the leaders in Islam. Okay. All right. Origins and history: the Bedouin trace back to ancient Semitic speaking peoples who roamed the deserts of the Arabian Peninsula and Syro-Mesopotamian fringes. Ancient Mesopotamian texts often refer to Amaru or Amorites, who were Western Semitic pastoralists. Hammurabi himself was Amorite, which connects him to these desert dwelling peoples. In that sense, the Amorites slash Bedouin were outsiders to Sumer, but gradually integrated, ruling Babylon and influencing Mesopotamian civilization. So you see, our culture was split into two. One went the Christianity route, one went the Muslim route. So, for instance, the reason why I'm saying that is because, as you see, that the Arab, they did take over ancient Kemet too, because there are some Phoenician kings as well as the Phoenician Babylonian kings as well. But I'm speaking about the cultural basis. The cultural basis of Islam took over the Sumerian culture, and the cultural basis of Christianity took over the ancient Egyptian culture, leaving the African was the one who created both cultures. We created Sumer, and we also created the Nile Valley civilization, and both were stolen from us. Origins and history: the Bedouin trace back to the. Oh wait, I did read that. Sorry. Geographic spread: historically, Bedouins lived across Arabian Peninsula, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, and the UAE, the Levant, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, Israel, and Sinai in Egypt, North Africa, Libya, Algeria, Morocco. Modern context: today, many Bedouins have settled in towns or cities, though some continue pastoral life. Governments in the Middle East often encourage or force settlement for political and economic reasons. Still, Bedouin identity remains strong, associated with freedom, poetry, and desert traditions. In short, the Bedouin are desert-dwelling Arab nomadic tribes whose lifestyle and identity go back thousands of years. Hammurabi's Amorite ancestry places him in line with these desert peoples, making him a Bedouin in the broad sense, even though he ruled a major city-state civilization in Babylon. So I said, were those ancient Sumerians pygmies in the sense that they were very short people? That's a fascinating angle. Let's look at what's known about the physical stature of the ancient Sumerian and then compare that with the idea of them being pygmies. Archaeological evidence. And this is the major evidence right here. This first piece of evidence right here is the major and most important. So the skeletal remains from Sumerian burial sites, Uruk, Lagash, etc., show that the average height was about 5'3" to 5'5", okay, for men, and slightly less for women. Compared to the modern averages, that is short, but it is not pygmy level. So pygmy level is like around 4'5", to relatively under 4 foot, like 4'10" and things like that, right? Pygmy groups today, like the Aka, the Mbuti, or the Baka in Africa, average under 5 feet. Sumerians were a little taller than that. Artistic depictions. Sumerian art shows figures with stocky, broad shoulders, round faces, round face features. Proportions are sometimes stylized. Big eyes, small stature relative to gods slash kings, which can give the impressions of shortness. But artistic convention does not equal actual body size. Ancient texts on stature. The Sumerians themselves called their people the Usagigag, the black-headed people. Their This describes their hair slash identity, not height. No Sumerian text calls them unusual, small, or pygmy-like. Why do pygmy associations arise? In later African and Near Eastern traditions, there are mentions of little people or dwarfs with spiritual power. Egypt, for instance, had Bes, a dwarf deity associated with protection and fertility. Some metaphysical traditions, like Afro-Unus, suggest that the earliest civilizations were founded by short-statured, woolly-haired people. This may be symbolic or ancestral memory rather than an archaeological measurement. The ancient Sumerians were short compared to us, about 5'3" on average, but not true pygmies in the biological sense. The pygmy label, if applied, is more metaphorical or cultural, representing an ancient, small-statured, wisdom-bearing people, rather than literal. All right. So I said, let's get into the law codes and create a chart side by side with the Code of Hammurabi. So here's a chart. This time I asked them to create a chart. Ain't that something? Ura Kagina reforms to protect poor from exploitation, limits powers of priests and officials, focused on protecting weaker members of society, I guess they didn't finish off the sentence. So Urnamu, oldest surviving written law code, fines for injury instead of physical punishments, system of fines and compensation carried by Hammurabi through harsher tense. Let's see. Then you have the Lipit Ishtar, bridges the Urnamu and Hammurabi, includes laws on property, marriage, covers contracts, property and family law, core parts in Hammurabi's law code. All right. So it asks, do you want me to add actual examples, quotations, paragraphs? So this was some of the, but I think some of it is cut off. I don't know. It cut off some of these examples. So yeah, so that's why I said, can you word it out? So this time I got it worded out here. So Urukagina of Lagash, Urukagina reforms are often called the earliest attempt at law in human history, though there were more social decrees than codified laws. He abolished corrupt practices where elites seized the land or property of the poor. Ain't that something? This was happening back in the 2350 BC, where elites were
Yeah. And
seizing the land or property of the poor. Mind you, these are African people that are doing this.
mm,
African kings.
mm,
Look at that. Abolish the corrupt practices of elites seized the land, who seized lands and property of the poor. That's crazy. He limited the power of priests and officials. Who do we see that's running America in all these places? We see the elites, we see the priests and the officials making sure temples could not excessively tax or abuse citizens. He specifically decreed protection for widows and orphans, ensuring that they are not burdened with unfair tribute. Hammurabi's echo, Hammurabi's prologue to his codes states that he was chosen by the gods to protect the weak, the widow, and the orphan. The language is almost a direct continuation of Urukagina's ethos, though Hammurabi structured it in formal written laws rather than proclamations. I take this as Hammurabi knowing that these were gods. You understand what I'm saying? So when he says that he was chosen by the gods, he's talking about us. Okay? Ur-Nammu of Ur. The Code of Ur-Nammu is the oldest surviving written code we possess. Example, if a man knocks out the eye of another man, he shall pay half a minima of silver. Punishments were financial compensation, not physical retaliation. Many laws were focused on justice and fairness, balanced punishment with restitution. It included penalties for thefts, adultery, and injuries, but fines were the main mechanism. See, this is a form of mercy. You know what I'm saying? It is a form of mercy. Hammurabi's echo. Hammurabi inherited the structure but changed the spirit. Where Ur-Nammu prescribed a fine for injuring an eye, Hammurabi demanded an eye for an eye. This is really what it's supposed to be. His system emphasized harsh physical reciprocity, called the lex talionis, reflecting a harder, more centralized state power compared to Ur-Nammu's reconciliation-focused approach. All right? But that's because, you know why? Ur-Nammu or Nammu is a what? Is a moon god. So they're about mercy. But guess what Hammurabi is? He was a representation of the sun god. And the sun god is what? Eye for an eye. The sun gods and what we represent don't play that game. Okay? You're not paying no fine for damaging someone.
Ain't no,
huh?
no, I was just gonna say, ain't no turning the cheek over here.
No. Ur-Nammu, yeah, Ur-Nammu is a moon god. Okay? So you can see the reason why Hammurabi was like, nah, we going eye for an eye over here. Lipit Ishtar of Isin. The code came between Ur-Nammu and Hammurabi. Example, if a man gives his son up for adoption and the adopter raises him, the natural parents cannot claim him. It covers contracts, property, inheritance, marriage, adoption, and relationships between slaves and masters. It shows a bridge between Ur-Nammu's compensation-based laws and Hammurabi's stricter system. Hammurabi's echo. Hammurabi took these domains, contracts, inheritance, marriage, and expanded them with exhaustive detail. For instance, his code has numerous laws about dowries, divorce, and inheritance disputes, showing continuity but a more rigid reinforcement. Hammurabi of Babylon. Hammurabi's code is the culmination of these earlier traditions. Nearly 282 laws covering property, trade, contracts, injury, family, labor, and class distinction. Famous example, if a man knocks out the eye of another man, his eye shall be knocked out. The principle of class-based justice is very strong. Punishment for harming a noble, commoner, or slaves were different. His prologue and epilogue frame him as a divine king chosen to bring justice, uniting earlier Sumerian ideas with Amorite rulership. Summary. Urukagina laid the moral foundation and protect the weak. Ornamu introduced written codification and compensation-based penalties. Lipit Ishtar expanded into family and property law, creating structure. Hammurabi inherited all this, but hardened the tone, emphasizing eye for an eye, justice, class hierarchy, and centralized royal authority. So Hammurabi's code is not an isolation creation. It is an Amorite adaptation of centuries of Sumerian law and social reforms, reshaped to fit a new political order. So Ornamu, the moon, and this compensation-based penalty is what we see today with some of these rich folks paying to get out of trouble. That's what the moon god did. But the sun god is all about eye for an eye. You kill somebody, you deserve to die. You got to look, but you know, of course, you got to look into it, have a trial, and then you go from there. Then I said, let's dive into who Urukagina is. Says, good. Urukagina is a key figure if we want to trace Hammurabi laws back to the earliest roots. Let's break him down in full. Who was Urukagina? Ruler of Lagash, a Sumerian city-state in southern Mesopotamia around 2350 BCE, known primarily for reform decrees rather than conquests. His reign is one of the earliest examples of a leader remembered for social justice. He came to power after a period of corruption in Lagash, where priests and officials had enriched themselves at the expense of common people. Look at that. This is black folk fighting against black folk. Urukagina reforms, early law code. His decrees are not preserved in full like Hammurabi's, but inscriptions on clay cones and tablets give us fragments. They emphasize protecting the weak from exploitation. Some examples: widows and orphans. He made decrees so that widows and orphans were not forced to pay unfair tribute or have their property seized. Priests and officials. He restricted priests and temple officials from seizing land, collecting excessive offerings, or exploiting commoners. Debts and taxes. He reduced burdensome taxation and abolished certain oppressive practices where the rich manipulated the poor. Social protection. Forbade powerful men from stealing the property of poor citizens. In essence, Urukagina's reforms are sometimes called the charter of freedom in human history. Religious and moral foundation. Urukagina justified his reforms by claiming they were commanded by Ningirsu, the city god of Lagash. This is some important because Hammurabi later uses the same structure. He too claimed his code came directly from the god Shamash, god of justice. So there is a direct ideological line from Urukagina to Hammurabi. Law and justice are not merely human decisions, but divine mandates to protect society. Urukagina's legacy. His reign did not last long. Lagash was eventually conquered by Lugal Zagesi of Umma, who unified parts of Sumer before being defeated by the Sargon of Akkad. Despite this, Urukagina is remembered as the earliest reformer king, a ruler whose concern was social justice over military conquest. Later rulers, Urnamu, Lipit, Ishtar, and Hammurabi, essentially took Urukagina's ideas that a king should protect the weak and turned it into full legal code. Urukagina was not a lawgiver in the same structured sense as Hammurabi, but he set the precedent. Law should protect widows, orphans, and the poor. Kingship has a divine duty to ensure justice. Priests and elites must be kept in check. Because of this, Urukagina is often regarded as a spiritual ancestor of Hammurabi's law code, and that is the pygmy god that helped to create Hammurabi's law code. Okay. All right. So I said, is there a biography on Urukagina? Said there isn't a biography of Urukagina in this modern sense, like a full ancient life story, because he lived in 2350 BCE, long before historical writing in that form existed. What we know comes mostly from archaeological inscriptions, clay cones and tablets, and fragments of text that from Lagash. Still, we can piece together a sketch of his biography from what survives. Um, Historical profile. Oh, his birth date and family lineage are not known. He rose to power in the city state of Lagash, a Sumerian urban center in southern Mesopotamia. He likely came from a priestly or elite family. Look at that. He likely came from a priestly or elite family, and he was against it. Since his leadership in Sumerian cities was tied closely to the temple and palace institutions, becoming ruler of Lagash, Urukagina became NC, ruler or governor, after a period of corruption under his predecessor. It seems he was elevated by popular support or a temple faction that sought reform because many of his decrees addressed the grievances of common people. His reforms, the Ur-Kagina Code, though not a codified law book, his decrees form the earliest known social reforms in history. Themes of his reform, once again, protection of widows, reducing corruption, temple taxation, stopping priests from seizing property and livestock, forbidding officials from exploiting the poor through forced labor extortion. He often attributed these changes to the will of Ningirsu, the city god of Lagash. The downfall, despite his reforms, Urkagina's reign was short. His rival, Lugal Dagesi of Umma, waged war against Lagash. In the resulting conflict, Urkagina was defeated, and Lagash was absorbed into Lugal Zugisi growing kingdom. Later, Lugal Zagisi himself was conquered by Sargon of Akkad, who founded the world's first world first empire. Legacy. Urukagina is remembered as the earliest reformed king, the first in recorded history to claim he ruled on behalf of the poor and vulnerable, while Hammurabi's code is more famous. Urukagina's reform set the moral precedent that a kingship involves justice and protection of the weak. Some scholars even call him the author of the first Bill of Rights. All right, so they gave a short biography of who he is. Right. So the next important question was Urukagina a Sagi god? Right. So Sagi god, and you're gonna hear that a lot, in my presentations. Means the black-headed people, or basically black people, or the people with woolly hair. Okay, so let's decode it carefully. What does Sagi Gog mean? In Sumerian, the people call themselves the Ug Sag Gi Gog Ga. Sometimes the Sagi Ga. This phrase usually translates as the black-headed people. People, head, and Gig, black or dark. It was a collective identity, not a specific ethnic tribe. It meant we, the black-headed ones, as opposed to foreigners. Were the rulers included? Yes. Kings, priests, and commoners of Sumer all used this identity. It was a way of saying we Sumerians, in contrast to outsiders like Amorites, Getuans, or Elamites. So we knew exactly who we were, because you do know there's dark-skinned people of Phoenician descent that have curly or straight hair. But we knew that these people had kinky hair because we separated ourselves from these particular people who were also black, but they had curly or straight hair. Okay? So anybody coming and they want to contest that, we already separated those people. We already knew that they had straight hair. But to let us know who had woolly hair, we were called the Sagi guy. Okay? So Urukagina, being the ruler of Lagash, was absolutely counted among the Ug Sagiga. Even though elites had more power, they were not seen as separate from the black-headed people. So remember, I was telling you, this is like black on black. You understand? So back then, you still had rich black folk that was trying to take advantage, right? So was the Urukagina a Sagi god? Yes. Urukagina was Sumerian, and therefore, by his own people's definition, he was one of the Ug Sag Gig Ga, the black-headed people. Why it matters for law codes. Urukagina reforms were made for the Sag Gig God to protect the commoners, the widows, orphans, who were included under this identity. Later, kings like Uru-Nammu and Hammurabi kept the same logic. Law is framed as a protection for the people, even though Hammurabi himself was Amorite slash Bedouin, an outsider adopting the Sagi God tradition. In short, Urukagina was a Sagi God, a black-headed Sumerian, while Hammurabi was not, because he was Phoenician, but inherited the codified their tradition. All right. Was Namu a Sagi god? Remember the moon god that I was talking about that had the mercy codes? So I would call those the mercy codes when you want to pay, instead of the eye for an eye. Yes, Urnamu was also a Ug Sagi god, right? Which is the black-headed people. Who was Unami was the founder of the third dynasty of Ur, which was 2112 to 2095 BCE, famous for the court of Urnamu, the oldest surviving law code we have. He rebuilt Ur into a powerful city and constructed the ziggurat of Ur, one of the most iconic Sumerian monuments. So a ziggurat is basically a pyramid. So pyramid and ziggurat is the same thing. All right. Identity of a Sagi used as a Sagi god. Urnamu was a native Sumerian king, not an Amorite or outsider. We had names for outsiders, okay? We knew how to identify them, and we know how to identify ourselves. The Sumerians consistently referred to themselves collectively as Ug Sagi Ga, the black-headed people. As king, Urnamu explicitly ruled on behalf of the black-headed people. His prologue to the law code says he was appointed by the gods to establish equity in land and banish malediction and violence, so that the strong may not oppress the weak. Though Unamu was a moon god, he was still protecting the weak. This is the same social justice language first seen under Urukagina, but in Urnamu's case, it was formalized into a structured written code. Contrast to Hammurabi's. Urukagina and Urnami equals Sumerian, Sagi Gog. Hammurabi was an Amorite, Bedouin background, not Sagi Gog by bloodline, but he adopted their laws and presented himself as their protector. Urnamu was absolutely a Sagi Gog, which is a black-headed Sumerian. His laws, like Urukagina's reforms, came from within that cultural identity. Unlike Hammurabi, who systemized them from outside the Sagi Gog lineage. Was Lipit Ishtar a Sagi Gog? Great follow-up. Let's place Lipit Ishtar in the framework of the Ug Sagi Gog, or the Sagi Gog equals black-headed people. Who was Lipit Ishtar? King of Isin, a Sumerian city-state, reigned around 1934 to 1924 BCE. He came after the fall of the third dynasty of Ur-Nammu's dynasty, and before Hammurabi, known for issuing the Code of Lipit Ishtar, which filled the gap between Ur-Nammu's code and Hammurabi's. Cultural ethnic identity. Lipit Ishtar ruled in Sumerian tradition. His court used in Sumerian language in inscriptions and law codes. He presented himself as chosen by the Sumerian gods An, Enlil, Nana, and Utu. He declared his duty was to bring justice to what? Black-headed people. The Ug Sag Giga. Exactly the same phrase used by Urnamu. Evidence in his law code. The prologue to Lipit Ishtar's code says, and mind you, Ishtar is also a moon god too. Okay? When An and Enlil had called Lipit Ishtar to establish justice in the land, to banish complaints, to turn back enmity and rebellion by force, and to bring well-being to black-headed people. This directly shows that he identified as a ruler of the Sagi God. Contrast with Hammurabi. So we have Urukagina, who is a Sagi God from Lagash. Then we had Ur-Nammu, a Sagi God from Ur. And then we have Lipit Ishtar, a Sagi God from Ison. And then it was taken over by Hammurabi, who was an Amorite, a Bedouin, not a Sagi God, though he inherited and expanded the laws. So did the laws come from the pygmies of ancient Sumer? Absolutely did. Okay. What about the height of the three rulers? So they ask so it says good, you're asking about the physical stature of Urukagina and Ur-Nammu and Lipit Ishtar. This is tricky because we don't have full skeletons of each ruler, but we can work with archaeology, average Sumerian height, and how they were depicted. So Urukagina, no skeleton identified as his been found, but we see that the average male height in early dynastic Sumer was 5'3" to 5'5". Okay. His inscriptions emphasize reforms, not his physical body, but statues of rulers from Lagash like Gudea, who came later, show stocky, short, broad-shouldered men. Like Urukagina matched his build, short by today's standards, strong and compact. Okay. Ur-Nammu, founder of the third dynasty of Ur, no certain remains of him have been identified. Statues and stelae, like Ur-Nammu's stelae, depict him as a short, thick-bodied, with rounded features, same height range, around 5'4". His monuments portray him kneeling and offering, which may exaggerate compactness, but archaeology suggests he was not tall. Lipit Ishtar, again, no skeleton securely tied to him has been found. Art from his period continues the Sumerian tradition of depicting kings stocky and robust. Average height in Mesopotamia did not change much in this span, still around 5'3" to 5'5". Conclusion, all three, Urukagina, Ur-Nammu, and Lipit Ishtar, would have been considered short men by modern standards. None were pygmies in the strict anthropological under the 5 feet, but they were closer in size to what later traditions describe as little black-headed people. This explains why their own self-identity as a Ug, Sagi Ga, black-headed people resonate with later traditions of small, wise, ancestral peoples. Okay. Is there any definitive proof of their heights in text or art? So there were none in the cuneiform, none in the art, but there was done in the archaeological evidence, right? Okay. Then I said, okay, great. We'll go from the archaeological evidence. Is there any proof that the people who began? Well, that's another question I was asking. But that kind of sums it up for the portion that's dealing with the pygmies giving the law codes to Hammurabi and him basically reforming them and basically giving it back and kind of, I guess I would say, taking it from the moon god, who kind of mercified it a little bit, but he switched it back to the sun laws, where the sun god's laws is about equal and powerful punishment as it pertains to damaging people and things like that. But my favorite is Urukagina, because he was about making sure that there was fair and equal treatment. Back then they still had elites that took power and limited the power of the elites and certain religious figures. As we can see today, they need a whole lot of beatings up top. We need Urukagina and his spirit to come down and raise hell amongst them. But yeah, that's my presentation for today. we're gonna tap into the last part of that statement, which is the Bible coming from Greek, the Old Testament coming from Greek, and the New Testament coming from the Roman uh from the Roman Empire. Okay, so we'll tackle that at another time, but I hope you like the presentation. I tried to keep it as short as possible. I said 20-25 minutes, but it looked like it was done in 45 minutes, but that's fine. We could what y'all think about that?
Yeah, that was another banger, and it's also just amazing how they hide this information, because it's obvious it was there. But
Mm-hmm.
you talk about the Sumerians, because I listen to a lot of debates with other people, and they always talk about the black-headed people, but they just never. They always kept believing that the Sumerians, was not us. Even much as even Yorkman was using Sumerian names and the gods and the Gigi and all this, none of them was touching on those particular kings. They had no idea, but we know that the moon god likes to dance around the topic, but he won't lead them to the correct information, because, like you said, you start changing. You go back far enough, the cycles change, and that's why you can see that. You can see when like with Thothmose, with the mercy, because his father's brother got killed, and the law was established. You supposed to took them out, but he gave the Jews mercy.
Yeah.
It was but same thing with Khufu. The same thing happened with Khufu. Gave them mercy by allowing them to come back in, knowing that they were excommunicated out, Africa and Asia. So it's the same thing what you found with these two kings here, and that's what people have to learn to look at the laws. All this still happened within the the moon cycle time frame, 6,000 years. So, but as time shrinked, you still had time where you could still execute sun cycle laws, but it wasn't as wide. But I think it was really, really good, and it's giving people more to chew on. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to take that long. Go ahead.
Nah, that was a great explanation, and only to really circle back, I want people to really understand that, because there's gonna be people that's gonna come forward and they're gonna be like, well, how do you know that they woolly head? We know that they were woolly head for sure, and I'm talking about without beyond a shadow of a doubt. We know that because they identified outside groups of people. We talking about people that had black skin just like them. They called them Amorites. They called them Bedouin. They had many names because they knew that they were completely different from them, though they had the same black skin. So the Sugagi, they knew that no, we have woolly hair. You got straight or curly hair. You are not the same as me. You understand what I'm saying? So you can't call yourself a Sagi god. You understand what I'm saying? Only we could call ourselves the Ug Sagi god. You can't call yourself that. You call yourself a Bedouin. You call yourself an Amorite. You call yourself anything but a Ug Sagi god. And these laws are for Ug Sagi god people. And that's how you know they were woolly haired people, and they were also pygmies in the sense that they were very short. Of course, at that particular point in time, we're growing a little taller. You understand what I'm saying? So we're not at the 4'5" and the under 4 foot. I mean the under 5 foot stature, because evolution from that point has been about 18 million years. So it's gonna make us grow a little bigger, and it made us grow even bigger now at a faster pace because we're heading into 3 South, and then we're at 3 South, so it's gonna rapidly go as faster than usual at this point in time. But I just wanted to make that particular thing clear that the Oog Sagi Gog was definitely woolly haired people. That's without beyond a shadow of a doubt. You understand? There's no contention there because we completely named those other people. All right. You want to tap into anything, Nebu?
Oh yeah, most definitely. Another thing to consider, and what was even more interesting and agreeable at best, was the fact that Hammurabi wasn't neither one of those.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't even a of the
No.
black-headed people, and he still managed to basically fulfill those laws of the sun god. Even
Mm-hmm.
so, I found that amazing, and just like you go back in the ancient Egyptian information, and it also brought out the information of how Hatshepsut did the same thing. She was a Phoenician, but she still upheld those, the laws of the sun god.
Right. Right. Because
So
the framework was already
mhm,
there.
yeah,
The framework was already there. We did a lot of that work. That's why Afro put were his laws originally his laws. Absolutely not. We the ones that put
mhm,
that there. We
yeah,
laid the
exactly.
framework. We created the society. So that
Hmm.
a little bit of what you saw before I even closed it out, I was trying to go back further to see, who created the Sumerian civilization. Eventually I'm gonna get to that. I'm gonna get to the bottom of it, who created it, where they came from, and things of that nature. Because they, to this day, they say it's a one of the ninth wonders of the world.
Hmm.
How that particular civilization just sprung up out of nowhere. Because cuneiform and that type of writing has no root. They don't even know where it came from. So it just sprung up out of nowhere. Basically, that's what they saying. But we know they didn't spring up out of nowhere.
No,
We know that
no.
we know that it came from our
Mhm.
people, and maybe something happened in Africa where they were like, "All right, we're gonna go this direction, and y'all can stay here, but we're gonna create our own civilization in this particular region right here, and y'all do y'all thing." Because and they probably had trade going on and things like that. So you know,
Yeah.
but that's just my piece on that.
Oh yeah.
All right, so
What direction you trying to go now?
I'm trying to go to the next one which is the secular history stuff.
Pardon me.
Okay, so you're gonna go to that, or you gonna start over, or you gonna?
Yeah, I'm gonna start over because it's a little bit lengthy.
Okay.
All right, so we're gonna end this one, and we're gonna come right back.
All right.
All right, true peace.